I think I know most of you, but for those of you that I don't know, my name is Patrick Warfield. I'm a professor of musicology in and director of the School of Music at the University of Minnesota. I've been here in the Twin Cities now. This is the beginning of my third academic year, and I will say it again, I can't tell you what an incredible delight it is to be in such a culturally vibrant, arts forward community. I hope you know that that's not true everywhere, and what we have here in the Twin Cities is really very special, despite whatever challenges there might be in making it all work. I hope that we can make this event more or less an annual event to introduce to our community of friends and supporters some of our newest School of Music faculty. And it also gives me just an opportunity to provide a few updates on what's going on in the School of Music. We got some really exciting things planned for this fall semester and also in the spring, although I'm going to focus mostly on the fall. But I think we'll start with our new faculty, and I am pleased to introduce you to two remarkable artists and intellectuals. This fall, which means really like a week ago, we welcome the interdisciplinary scholar Alaba Ilassamni as our new assistant professor of ethnomusicology. Dr. Ilassamni comes to us from Florida State University, where he recently earned his PhD with a very insightful dissertation on the Nigerian musician and activist Fela Kuti. And I think Clayton has just dropped, yes, the announcement of Dr. Ilassamni's appointment in the chat if you'd like to read some of the background about him. We are also really honored to welcome our new assistant professor of cello, Matt Heimovitz, who comes to us from McGill University, where he taught for many years. I think it's fair to say Matt's pretty well known to the Twin Cities community. He's played here on a number of occasions in the past, including I learned recently at the Dakota Jazz Club, some of the Bach cello suites, which is super exciting, but I think also with the SPCO. And Matt's career as a cellist is rooted in expanding the repertoire and the traditions surrounding that incredible instrument. So I thought we would just jump right in because I know you want to hear from both of these extraordinary musicians. I'm going to ask each of you, Matt and Alaba, to give us what I like to call the kind of 2-minute biography. What do you want people to know about who you are, where you come from, and how you engage with music? So if we could start with Alaba, that would be great.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. Honored to be joining the School of Music, and thank you, Patrick, thank you, Clayton and Jessica, for putting this together. It's nice to meet everyone. Just a very quick bio of myself. I was born and raised in Lagos, Nigeria. I believe Lagos is a cosmopolitan and diverse city, and you may compare that to New York. Um, I was raised in a household where we listened to and experienced diverse musical traditions, including, diverse African traditional and popular music, American pop music, Jamaican reggae, Indian music through Bollywood, of course, and film music through, from Chinese movies. Jackie Chan was my favorite actor actually growing up, and most of you might be familiar with him. But I also grew up in a household where my father loved um, hymns, actually, and by extension, classical music. So I was exposed to a lot of diverse music actually growing up. In terms of my education, most of my um, pre tertiary education was done in Nigeria, so I went to a musical conservatory in Nigeria. But I also got certificates in piano, percussion from the ABRSM School of Music, London, Trinity College of Music, London. My music education degree from the University of Texas in Tyler, and my musicology degree from Florida State University. For me, music really has been a gateway for learning about cultures and traditions, considering my own background and exposure to diverse musical traditions growing up. Back to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Alba. And I think one of the things we've all been really impressed about you is the kind of hunger you have for music. You seem to devour all kinds of music, which is really exciting. And the global perspective you bring to campus is also very exciting. Matt, could you jump in with your 2-minute introduction, which I think is probably almost as global?
Good afternoon, everyone. Wonderful to be with you, and thank you, Patrick and Clayton and Jessica, for organizing this gathering today. Um, I have a very different experience the Nalaba growing up. I was, I would say, in a pretty sheltered classical music household where I didn't really realize there were genres of music outside of classical until my first year in college. So I grew up studying with Leonard Rose, sort of in the romantic, in sort of 19th century virtuoso tradition. And but when I did realize there were other genres, and there was a professor who started taking out LPs, and we listened to Miles Davis and John Coltrane and Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin, and suddenly this whole world opened up to me, and I was very, eager to sort of discover all of this music out there, and I also began at that time to work with living composers, and I had a very fortuitous encounter. My first encounter with a living composer was with Gheorghe Ligeti, who I had the opportunity to work on his solo sonata with him, and I was recording, and this 2 minutes is going to go by very fast, so I better give you more of an overview. But before Ligeti, that experience, which really transformed my life in terms of realizing that the tradition of classical music was a living, breathing tradition that I could work with with composers who would then give me a different perspective on the music that I was also passionate about, but that I couldn't talk to Bach and Beethoven and Brahms, um, so before working with Ligeti, I had already recorded with the Chicago Symphony and James Levine, and had a contract with Deutsche Grammophon, and was really kind of following the traditional path of performance, classical performance. And as I started working with composers, as I started to really reflect on what my role is in for my generation, for this this moment in time, and what the relevance of classical music and how to build an audience, and reaching out to different audiences, and being more expansive about um, the presentation and the repertoire and the programs, um, that started to take a kind of life of its own. And so in 2000, I had just recorded the Bach cello suites, and I went out and started playing in coffee houses and rock clubs and alternative spaces all over the country, which then led to a kind of a 50-state tour, um, bringing in some of the new music and American composers that I had worked with at that point. And that project was called Anthem, and that was a 50-state tour, and that took me all around, and just playing solo cello throughout the country, and it was really kind of a revelation for me to have that experience. So um, that's it in a nutshell, and I am thrilled to be starting at the University of Minnesota, and had a really when I arrived here, I don't know who said that the only thing, um, or the two worst things in life are moving and death. So when I moved here, um, it was a big culture shock already, and I know the Twin Cities over the years, but just being out of boxes is a whole new experience. And after just the week of meeting my students, studio, and beginning to teach, it was a really incredibly fulfilling week, and I'm really thrilled for what all that is to come, and all the collaborations over the next months and years.
Thank you, Matt. And I hope one of the things you said early on will become a bit of a theme today. Like you talked about being at university and somebody opening your eyes to different, or maybe your ears, right, to different kinds of music. And that's certainly one of the things we hope happens every day for our students here at the University of Minnesota. So if we could go back to Alaba for a minute, you've written about the great Nigerian musician Fela Kunte, and I don't know if everybody on the call will know his music, but it's perhaps the most important recent popular musician out of that part of the world. What drew you to Fela, and how does your research add to our understanding of his legacy? Right, a lot's been written about him. How do we know more about him?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So first and foremost, I do have to tell you that I have diverse research interest. And sorry, I think there's something wrong with my internet. It keeps freezing. So if at any point I do freeze, just know that it's my internet. So I do have diverse interest, but mainly within the scope of global Black music. But at this time, my research is focused on the late Nigerian musician Fela Kuti. And perhaps a very quick overview of Fela. Again, he's the late Nigerian musician. He was a band leader, he was a composer, he was a political activist who created the genre of music known as Afrobeat. Not to be confused with the new genre called Afrobeats with the S at the end. So Fela created his music. He was openly using his music to criticize the Nigerian government, to talk about the corruption that was rampant at the time. And in his own phrase, Fela would say, music is a weapon. So in a way, he did use his music as a weapon to speak for the masses, and that's Fela Anikulapo Kuti. But what drew me to Fela Kuti? Musically, I'm very fascinated with the music of Fela Kuti, and I had no idea I would be writing about him. Because there are at least five biographies on this, musician called Fela Kuti, and I thought, um, perhaps it's time to write on other musicians, African musicians. Um, but Fela just kept coming to me. I was going to write about him for my master's thesis, but then COVID came, I had to change my direction because I wouldn't be able to do ethnographic research. So I changed my direction and I had another topic for my dissertation. But then again, everywhere I turned to, it was as though Fela was following me, and I'll give you some examples. There will be several speakers coming to Florida State University coming to speak about Fela. Or I go to a restaurant in Tampa or Dallas, and I'll find a picture of Fela Kuti. There was an exhibition in 2023 on Fela Kuti at the Paris Philharmonie in Paris, France, which I was there, by the way. So there's been different manifestations of this guy post 1997. And the question that I'm asking through my research is, why is Fela Kuti still relevant? Why are people still calling on this guy? How can we understand his legacy and his afterlife? And that's what really my research is about, to help us understand um, this deep fascination and perhaps global fascination with Fela Kuti. There's an all-female band in Brazil that plays Afrobeat, inspired by Fela Kuti. Or you go to Japan, there's Felabration, which is a celebration that celebrates Fela Kuti's legacy. So I'm trying to understand why this guy is still relevant and how people engage with this guy, who to a lot of people is also very problematic. So if you don't know about Fela, you can really quick overview about him. He's also a very problematic and controversial musician. So I'm looking into Fela Kuti to understand what his legacy is all about and why people are still fascinated with this guy. What I do love about coming to the University of Minnesota and joining the faculty at the School of Music is that my own interest in global Black music and expressive cultures add to our current offerings, and perhaps also expands the scope of what we offer to students as it relates to African and African diasporic music. Um, so I'll stop right there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I should also just add, if you would like to drop questions in the chat, by all means, and we'll have a little time at the end too, where you can unmute and ask questions of our two colleagues. I was thinking about one of the things you said there, about expanding some of the expertise we have in the African diaspora. And it's worth noting, Alaba does not come into this as the only expert in the African diaspora. We have Dr. Scott Curry, we have Akosua Addo. At this point, we have a very nice conglomeration, I think, of faculty uh, who really do amazing work in that space. And that's something we need to make much more of in both of our advertising and in our curriculum. So, Matt, you too have helped us understand a global musician in a new way. I will admit that I think before I met you, I did not know Thomas de Hartmann, the Ukrainian composer. And could you talk to us a little bit about what brought you to de Hartmann? You've now recorded his cello concerto, and I think it's Joshua Bell who's made the first recording of his violin concerto. He's having a bit of a renaissance thanks to you. Why? And what does his music have to tell us today?
Well, I did not know anything about this Ukrainian-born composer, Tomas de Hartmann. A few years ago, actually right in the pandemic, when many concerts were canceled, I had started a commissioning project and I was doing other things and teaching online. Um, but I just received a phone call from someone who's involved with the Tomas de Hartmann project. And they said, we have this violin concerto, we have this cello concerto. And the more I learned about the cello concerto, I was intrigued because the cello concerto was written in 1935. And um, it was first performed by Paul Tortelier, a legendary cellist who I grew up listening to his LPs. And Paul Tortelier was the principal cellist for a few years of the Boston Symphony. And so the premiere took place with the Boston Symphony. And then this piece just disappeared, I think partly because of the Second World War. It just never took on a life, and it was never recorded. And so they sent me the score, and I was even more intrigued. And I was supposed to record it in Ukraine. This is before the war with Russia. But again, it was pandemic times and even pre-vaccine, and so it just wasn't totally safe to travel there. And so that recording fell through. When the war broke out, now 3 years ago, um, nearly 3 years ago, I called the gentleman who brought this piece to my attention and said, we have to record this. And he said, yeah, but how? We can't go to Ukraine right now to record. There's a war. So I was scheduled to play a Russian, well, he was living in exile anyway, Schnitke, Alfred Schnitke cello concerto with the Leipzig Orchestra. And I just asked the conductor, Dennis Russell Davies, who actually has a Twin City, very strong Twin Cities connection. But I asked Dennis actually, and Dennis brought it to the orchestra. And the orchestra just voted unanimously that we should record live the Ukrainian piece, and on the condition that we record the Schnitke the next year, which we did. So so it all got done, but it was really quite amazing to have that support from the orchestra in Leipzig for the Ukrainian people and for this Ukrainian piece. And yeah. And then since then I've performed it, and now we just released a solo piece of Thomas de Hartmann. So just a wonderful composer that finally is getting his due. And Joshua Bell, took an interest also and is advocating for the violin concerto. And it's just unbelievable to me that music written so many decades ago has never been recorded, has never really been heard. I did find the most meaningful experience I had with the concerto was bringing it to Ukraine last year in May 2024. um, we the orchestra in Odessa received an award from the U.S. State Department, and we toured 4 cities in Ukraine, and that was on one hand thrilling to bring this music to audiences there who were hearing their own music for the first time, and also, very alarming to see how what the conditions are that they're living and every day, going into the bunkers with the air raid sirens and electricity being cut for hours a day and curfew. Uh, there was no food after concerts, that kind of thing. I mean, so it was definitely a time of war, but at the same time, people go on with their lives, and it was really extraordinary to meet so many Ukrainians and just to see their resilience and their love of their culture, their pride in their history and culture, and um, to participate in celebrating that.
I'm really struck by the degree to which music matters in a non-musical way in both the work you're doing and Alaba, some of the work you've done around Fela Kuti's activism, right? It's not just about the music, but the way the music's been used or the way the music has given voice to people. And in both of those cases, you work in a global perspective. Maybe Matt, you want to talk a little bit about how you operate around, in places other than the United States and how that experience leads to how you teach your students.
Well, yes, I mean that experience in Ukraine. I'm also born in Israel, so there's a whole Middle Eastern, um, with the commissions that I've been involved with the Primavera Project. That's 81 composers, and I have to say that I see Libby Larson here, and hi Libby, I need to reach you. um, so yeah, we're down to the last 20 commissions for this project, um, and I don't know if we have time for that in this, but anyway, very global project in terms of that's really kind of organically diverse, as a project. If you're going to commission 80 composers from the States, it's really fascinating to see all the different backgrounds that are involved. And Aliba, I don't know if you know the music of Enkiru Okoye, but anyway, she's one of the early commissions, and um, one of my close friends, David Sanford, wrote one, and he's a great big band composer. And we have Philip Glass, to just Missy Mazzoli to and hopefully Libby Larson soon. So yeah, that uh, and the United States. I mean, and being in Minneapolis over the last week and a half, it's really quite that exciting to I grew up in New York, and I feel I feel that energy and that diversity here, and so it's at the same time so that all of that is there, but a lot of the music that I spend my time thinking about and passionate about and bringing to audiences. Um, there were certain times in history that in Germany or Austria or France or Italy, and so there's that global part of it as well to me that is really important, that we go back to hundreds of years and really also learn that history and experience those cultures. So I don't know. I'm uh, an optimist about our current. I feel like it's a golden age of music to have this range of diverse styles and history. Hundreds of years of millennia of history, musical history, and so it's really an exciting time to experience all of that.
Thank you. And I want to kind of toss the same question over to you, Alba. You come from an international background. You might tell us a little bit about your, I guess, commissioning project around African composers, but how does this all experience come to what the work you do here in the Twin Cities? Are you able to unmute yourself? We might need to remake him a co-host, Clayton. See if I can do it.
Yeah, change that.
There we
All
go.
right. Okay. So to the last part of your question, I haven't done any work yet in the Twin City, which is what I'm looking forward to. Um, so I previously said that part of what I do, is on Fela Kuti, but I do have a lot of diverse interests, and one of them includes African arts music. I grew up in Nigeria. We were colonized by the British. The educational system is designed after the British educational system. The music that we studied in school isn't different from what you study in conservatory here. And that's actually quite surprising to a lot of people. We do go through 4 semesters of music history, but really we're studying Western music history. So it's pretty much the same education here. And there's been, several West Africans, mostly Nigeria, Ghana, um, but also in East Africa, if you talk about Tamusuza, for example, who wrote for Kronos Quartet, um, most of them studied in the UK, studied Western music in the UK, became composers or organists. But what I'm trying to highlight in all of this is that there's been a counter response to Western art music, in which a lot of, West Africans, especially who studied in the UK in the 1970s, post-colonial Nigeria, post 1960, um, took that Western music training and in a way indigenizing this Western musical tradition and creating something new out of it to call it African art music. There's an argument that what Philip Glass composed can be described as African art music because, if you're familiar with Akin Oba, who is a late scholar and composer, Akin Oba believed that to write African art music, you would use musical resource from traditional African music, and perhaps, then we can have a true African art music. So part of what I've been doing in my own public-facing work is to promote this um, musical tradition, really, which is the response to Western music, Western classical music, called African art music now, to promote this tradition, but to move beyond the assumption that you have to be African to write African art music. Because when we did the first commissioning project in Lagos, we asked for people to submit compositions. And some of those compositions, if I just take out the name of the composer and it performed here in the Twin City, you might as well assume that whoever composed it lived in the UK or in the US. Because I myself have written fugue, and it has nothing to do with whether I'm a Nigerian, but there are rules that guides the composition of fugue. So after that first commissioning project, which was very eye-opening, and we saw the assumption that people had that you have to be African to write African art music. The next commissioning project that we did was more expansive, including people from Poland, Brazil, Mexico. We had about 8 international composers, and they went through, seminars. We read works on African art music, by Akin Uber and the likes, the idea of creative musicology, which is to fusing research and artistic work to create what we call African art music. And we were blown away by what people actually wrote, especially the non-Africans who embrace this idea of, combining research and artistic um, output. So it was quite really interesting, and that's one thing that I do on the side with African art music. So yeah, in the Twin City, um, it's quite uh, impressive the landscape, the music, the art and music landscape that we have here. What I see, I just see a lot of opportunities. I do see a lot of opportunities for collaboration, for continuing what I've already started with this African Art Music Commissioning project, but not just that, to also building some sort of intercultural ensemble, if that's possible. Um, so it's all part of it's all part of my global exposure. In my own research, takes me around the globe. For my dissertation, I was in France, thanks to the ACLS. I was in France, I was in London, I was in Ghana, I was in South Africa. And what that does, it highlights the importance of what we do, but also reaffirms that music cannot be done in isolation. Scholarship cannot be done in isolation. We have to collaborate, whether in performance and also in the production of knowledge itself, that all of this cannot be done in isolation. But one thing it also does is it, it, it exposes you to new ways of thinking, to embracing local meanings, because what jazz means in the US is not the same thing that jazz means to people in South Africa. And you'll be surprised to hear that there's a South African jazz music. Um, and Germans too have their own interpretation of jazz music. So it's very, very interesting how music travels and people take on musical traditions that are not their own and then embrace it and indigenize it and make it their own. So there's endless possibilities with what we do. And, as much as we should talk about how different we are, but music also reveals the shared humanity that we have as well. I'll stop there, Patrick.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I want to pull on just one thread of what you said. You talked a little bit about your own background, scholar, composer, band, ensemble leader. We did a search intentionally looking for someone like you, a scholar practitioner. So can you talk about what you might dream that could mean now that you're a professor at a university?
Yeah, I knew you were looking for me when I saw the job posting. In fact, four of my friends sent me that job posting. I had already seen it, but the four people sent it to me. They said, like, Alaba, this is your job. Because it fully describes, and I told you this during the interview, it describes what I've been doing as a scholar musician. And, thanks also to our program at Florida State University, we at Florida State embrace this idea of creating scholar musicians. So the musicology program at Florida State emphasizes performance as part of scholarship. So part of what I envision to do here in the Twin Cities, um, for some of you, you might not know this, but I started the African popular music ensemble at Florida State University, which is perhaps one of the first in the country, really, in terms of collegiate African pop ensemble. Um, I do plan to continue that work here in the Twin Cities. So uh, Patrick and I will figure out how that would look. At Florida State, community members were welcome to participate in the ensemble, not just for students, it was also open for community members. So I don't know how it would shape up here in the Twin Cities and in the School of Music, but be on the lookout. We'll be creating something like that here. Thank you.
Excellent. And I'm going to, since Libby Larson's name's come up already, I'm just going to embarrass her a little bit more to say one of Alaba's faculty members at Florida State was our mutual friend, Denise von Glahn, who's written the biography of Libby. Yet another connection. I'm going to go back to Matt if we could. So like Alaba, you've got this interesting packaged career of, phenomenal cellist, commissioner, program note writer, so many different things. And can you envision how that impacts the way you approach your work with students?
Um, well, but one thing that I noticed last week was the range of um, in the studio. It's really um, really wonderful. Um, from virtuoso players who are still in high school, a few of them, to genetic biologists taking cello as an elective, to the three doctoral students, to the I mean it's such a wide ranging and different backgrounds, and um, I love teaching in that way, and having those different challenges, and trying to help shape and guide very different relationships with the instrument and with music, and so to me, the idea of being expansive, and looking at a range of uh, repertoire that is not necessarily always just the standard, opening up. Some students are all they have wanted to play is 19th century romantic European music, and so when I suggest, maybe let's consider something a little more out there, written 3 years ago, or just to kind of mix it up. They kind of are a little apprehensive, and then they realize that that they really do love it, and that it also affects what all the other music. It makes it so much easier once you're expansive in that way. So there's that. There's also I have loved. It was interesting to hear about Aliba's performance groups, because I started years ago an ensemble, Ucello, a cello ensemble, and we've done a variety of things, including one project where it was called Meeting of the Spirits, named after a Mahavishnu um, tune, John McLaughlin um, tune, Meeting of the Spirits, and we just did a big band. We turned the cello ensemble into a big band, basically, from blues in A minor for two cellos to Mingus, Haitian fight song. So I mean, we eight cellos. So we kind of ran the gamut. And that project, I mean, I just couldn't believe what the students achieved with that. This was back in 2010 now, and that was nominated for a Grammy, and it was just me playing with my students, and I hope to bring that back. We've done some other interesting things for children and families. Angel Heart, kind of a musical storybook project where we've had actors narrate, and anyway, we've done all kinds of interesting off the beaten track uh, repertoire with the ensemble, and I hope to bring that back. And I mentioned that to the studio in our studio class, the possibility of that, and I said, are there anybody interested in doing this with the cello ensemble? And I expected a couple of hands, but all the hands went up. So I think there's a lot of interest in this, and so I'll talk to Patrick, and we'll figure out how to bring this back. But it's just it also gives me a different kind of insight into the students, because it's one thing to teach Socratically, one on one, and go back and forth, and it's another thing to play with your students, and then you suddenly learn all kinds of things, and just what their chamber music skills are, how they're listening, um, how they're able to process while maintaining their chops, and play well and in tune and all that, and in time. So yeah, so for me, that connection also of I mean, my college experience was in musicology, and I just saw my wonderful advisor from Harvard, actually, Lewis Lockwood, one of the great Beethoven scholars. I just saw him a couple weeks ago. He's 94 years old, and just sharp as anything. I mean, just incredible mind. And um, Lewis is an amateur cellist, and that uh, I think informs his work, and it certainly informed my work and has always informed my work in terms of the connection between knowledge, between history and cultural awareness and performance. How do you connect the dots? And so I'm constantly striving to do that with my students. And anyway, I'll stop there.
I love that. And for those of you that don't know, the Twin Cities will be host to both the American Musicological Society meeting and the Society for Music Theory meeting jointly in November. So if you can't get enough of your musicology and music theory, you're in the right city. Matt, I wanted to give you a chance to talk a little bit about your couple of other your projects. You mentioned Primavera, but you can maybe go into a little bit more detail on that, and also maybe the Jacqueline project you've got.
Oh, great. Yeah, Primavera Project, it essentially takes two paintings, hundreds of years apart. The Botticelli, Sandro Botticelli Primavera painting, which hangs at the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. Um, and then a wonderful, one of the greats, I think, living painters, Charlene von Heil, uh, reimagines the Botticelli, and her Primavera is Primavera 2020, which she created for the project. Um, my partner and I went down to Marfa, my partner Jeffrey Ann and I, Marfa, Texas, to at the invitation of Charlene. We had just seen her artwork at the in Washington D.C. at the Hirshhorn Gallery, and were blown away. And I just reached out, and it turns out that Charlene loves music, and her father had gone to my concerts in Germany, and so right away we kind of connected and spent hours in this is now 2019, just discussing the state of the world and just being on the same wavelength in terms of that we were concerned about where the world is at. And uh, and so she looked over at the wall where she had a really large painting taking over the entire wall, and she said, "I think I'm done with this painting. I think I'm going to start yours next." And within a few weeks, she called and had Primavera 2020, and I was expecting to commission 9 pieces, or we were expecting to commission 9 pieces um, that were going to be tone poems for cello and orchestra, and then the pandemic hit, and so we right away sort of pivoted to a solo project, and then we thought, well, there are 9 characters or figures in the paintings. Maybe this is kind of a viral commissioning project where these 9 composers suggest the next 9, and so on, until we get to 81. And that's how it's a commissioning project of 81 pieces. And I think we've had now 60 commissioned. They're all recorded. The fifth batch out of 6 I just recorded, um, and we'll have the final ones hopefully in the spring if I can manage it. There's a lot going on right now this year, but hopefully we can complete that project soon, and then have fun with how to present. I've been presenting it with the Bach cello suites and just and with Josquin, actually, because Missy and a couple of the composers, Lisa Bialawa and a couple of others, they took Josquin and Dupré um, as a kind of starting point, bridging these hundreds of years musically, like what Charlene and Botticelli do with art. So that's that project. And I just came right before moving with my boxes to Minneapolis. I was rehearsing and performing an opera in Portland, Oregon. It was a remount of Jacqueline, which is an opera on the life of Jacqueline Dupré, legendary cellist who I was fortunate enough to get to know in her final years. But and I grew up with Jacqueline Dupré's music, her recording, especially of the Elgar Concerto, but all of her recordings. She was my hero and idol. And then Jackie got MS and had to give it all up way too early. And so this opera is about her life, but it really is about this almost biblical story of having it all and having it stripped away from you, and the it is operatic in scope. So that's what I was doing, and that's it's just soprano and cello for 90 minutes. Um, but it feels like an opera. It feels it feels grand in the scope of the emotions. And so yeah, so I was just doing that. There's a album out of that. We're talking about filming it, and hopefully it would be wonderful to bring it to the Twin Cities. I would love to bring it here, and I could go on about my own experiences with Jacqueline Dupre in the last years, but yeah,
That's
I think
fantastic.
we're
You can
running out of time.
for sure. I'm going to pitch one more question, then I'm going to give a chance for our collective wisdom to pitch questions as well. But you can take this, both of you, however you'd like to go. We've heard a lot about composers, and the Twin Cities is full of wonderful composers. I see Dr. Trinan is on here. It seems as though every time I go to a wind band or wind ensemble concert, there's a local composer on the program. We're also have on the screen people from the Minnesota Orchestra, the Opera, the Schubert Club, SPCO. There's this rich body of performers in town. So, Alaba, Matt, do you have any dreams of how you'd like to engage with this rich community?
I guess I'll go first. Uh, I have already said this that I think one of the selling points for the Twin Cities is the diverse and several arts and cultural institutes and organizations that are here. Per capita, I don't think you get this anywhere else in the country, and even perhaps in the world. And I lived in Houston, Texas for 5 years. What we have here is nothing compared. Um, it's very, very highly impressive what we have here. And what I see is, a lot of collaboration. Um, I'm a scholar of popular music, but I'm also a scholar of art music. So whether it's the Schubert Club or the Philharmonic, or you're a living composer who lives in town, like Libby Lawson, nice to see you again. You were on campus on the day of my interview. So we spoke very briefly. Um, what I just see and what I'm open to is, just collaboration and collaboration and collaboration. So in addition to my fellow project, or perhaps the African Pop Ensemble that I might start, or perhaps some intercultural music festival that we might have, um, I do want to also see opportunities where composers are commissioned, and perhaps given the opportunity to explore their own vision of what African art music might be. I mean, that's something that I would love to, see Libby explore. Like, what's your own take on this thing called African art music? So what I see is a lot of collaboration. This Friday, I'll be going to the ASI. I believe that's the American Swedish Institute. They have an event. So part of what I'm doing this semester is just reaching out, meeting folks, um, getting connected to the community, getting to know everyone. I don't want it to be an extractive relationship. I do really actually want to build genuine relationship with, folks around the Twin Cities, and whatever collaboration can come out from those relationships, I'm open to them and I'm looking forward to them. So thanks again for being here, all of you, and I'll be meeting most of you in the nearest future, yeah, in person. Yeah.
Thank you, Alaba. And Matt, do you have thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, I second Aliba's sentiment for collaboration. I'm looking forward to bringing to sharing, so some of what I've been working on with the Twin Cities community, and at the same time, I have no doubt that my musical life and is about to expand being here, and I'm looking forward already to some scheduled, chamber music performances, colleagues from the U, and also from the really extraordinary orchestras that we have. My first, I think it is actually my first professional sort of orchestral experience as a soloist was with the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra when Zuckerman was conducting. Because Zuckerman and my memory goes back at that time to simply all I remember is the blizzards. We had a week of concerts, and I had never seen so much snow in my entire life, and I couldn't believe I was at that time I was like 15 years old, I think. I couldn't believe that the concert halls were completely packed. Like, what are these people doing coming to concerts in the middle of these blizzards? And so that was my first experience with the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, and I hope that to reconnect, and I have not worked with the Minnesota Orchestra after all these years, but I know many players and have many friends in the orchestra. So looking forward to all those collaborations. But I really believe I really second what Aliba just said, because I feel exactly the same way. I feel like my world is about to expand.
Fantastic. I think you find it will. I know mine certainly did upon moving here. So I wanted to just give a couple minutes if anybody has a question they'd like to ask of either Aliba or Matt. Dr. Horry.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay, wonderful. Well, I'm not directly a faculty member or student at U of M Twin Cities. I did my MMA and DMA at U of M Twin Cities, and I'm now teaching at the Music School of Delaware, and a clinician and an international solo artist. I perform solo a lot, and I'm very fortunate that I've recently been able to reconnect with the U of M Twin Cities community a bit. I'll be receiving the Emerging Alumni Award along with several of my colleagues, one other from music actually, in November. So I'm very, very thrilled about that. And I'm also excited to hear some of the parallels that I'm hearing between Matt and Aliba's work to some of the things that we discussed during my inaugural dinner with Patrick and several of the admins, the dean of CLA. So it's exciting to kind of almost feel like we're getting back to that same discussion about some of these values and ideas that I'm hearing from the two of you. And it's just really thrilling to be on a call with so many unbelievably talented and hardworking people that are doing so much great work. So that's just cool to feel a part of that energy. It's nice to see Libby Larson. I don't know if you remember me. We worked together a number of times when I was at the U of M, along with Craig Kirchhoff, and it's great to see Emily. I'd love to chat with her about band world in U of M Twin Cities lately. Worked with Craig Kirchhoff very closely for a long time. And if there's people from Minnesota Orchestra and SPCO here, maybe some of you remember me from being lucky enough to go back there and play the Triangle once or twice when I was freelancing in the cities I was freelancing in the cities as a percussionist for that's my primary instrument, for about 10 years. So been sort of everywhere and anywhere there. And now I do have a really interesting question for Matt, which is along the same theme of some of the things we've been talking about. But just very quickly, my work, which I'm very grateful has been acknowledged by the Alumni Association, is less about social issues and social activism per se, but it does address diversity in sort of a different angle, which is this maybe I would say humanist kind of view of something that Alaba mentioned earlier as shared humanity or shared experience. So my work is a little more focused on this body, mind, heart, spirit, culture model of what constitutes sort of universal human experience in music. And in the past 10 years, I've become a little more interested in the science part of it. So I've been very heavily into applied neuroscience and how that might relate to musicianship, cultural exchange, of course, like many of you are now. And so lastly, I would say mindfulness. So I've been mindfulness and secular meditation ideas, and these are the things that are center of my work, and I perform as well. So in that vein, I'm curious to hear, because I'm a performer and I teach performance skills in a lot of private lessons. I'm curious, maybe Matt could speak to a word of during all of these interests in underrepresented composers and experimental music and living composers. One challenge I think we all face is still giving students essentially basic training that probably many of them already have under control if they've passed an audition for U of M Twin Cities. But amidst the enthusiasm for some of these progressive ideas, how might you address some of the more fundamental, maybe we could say fundamental music skills that some of your students might have a deficit in, whether it's rhythm, intonation, and how might you set specific expectations for that student? So, next week, I need to hear this better. So I'm kind of like really reeling back the discussion. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. Thanks for your time, everybody.
Thank you for asking that question. And that's not what I was expecting
Right.
after listening to you. But that's absolutely, it is fundamental. I mean, we are talking about shared humanity, which I think is critical, and also the relationship of not only what we do in classical music or music, but higher education right now. The relationship of higher education to society is very much, maybe not at risk, but it's challenging times. So yes, the answer to your question is yes. I think as an instrumentalist, we need to work on our voice. So sound production is critical. I think no matter what genre you play, if you're going to join Alaba's ensemble or mine, you got to play in tune, or maybe even more complex intonations than just the minor and major scales. But yes, you've got to have a sense of time and rhythm and pulse, and these basics are critical. And I think that is I think you are absolutely right in your question, the formulation of your question, and that it starts with those principles. And so every conversation that I had with my students last week was, okay, what's your scale routine, and what etude are we playing, and let's shape that. And then I listen, and I try to diagnose what the weaknesses are and what we need to fill in. And but yeah, I mean, the fundamentals are critical, and it doesn't really matter what genre you go into, and what, even if you're going to become a lawyer or whatever you use your music degree for. Yeah, you should play with a beautiful sound, and or be able to play with a beautiful sound, even if a piece of music calls for something very different. Those are the values that my teachers, but my primary cello teacher, Leonard Rose, who I would say was a very conservative player in terms of repertoire choices. He had a very limited repertoire. He was not interested in anything new, actually. although one of the greatest recordings is a live record that I've ever heard of cello is a live recording of Leonard Rose playing Barber Concerto with Leonard Bernstein conducting at Carnegie Hall. I heard a bootleg tape of this performance, and there's just nothing like it. It's incredible. But apparently, Lenny had to twist his arm to play the Barber Concerto. He didn't want to play it, from 1945. So so yeah, all of that expansiveness is really wonderful, but I do agree that you have to have the a foundation, and you'll enjoy the expansiveness much more. You'll be able to go out and embrace different experiences as long as you know address what you have to. So yeah, I think it's absolutely critical. You can't skip that. And I mean, I was in working on the opera. The soprano Marnie Breckenridge told me that it was really very nice. She said, "I learned so much from you as an instrumental, from your instrumental perspective. I learned so much from you." And I said, "Well, okay, but all I do is try to sound like you. I just try to sound like a human voice, and that's the foundation of what we do."
Thank you, Matt. Those are absolutely the questions that are occupying the faculty now. How do we keep a high level of excellence and simultaneously do all the engagement work that is so important? Does one come before the other? I'm mindful of our time. I want to thank everybody for coming, and especially thank Alaba and Matt. I'm going to do the 45-second, I hope, what's going on in the School of Music that you can get very excited about this semester. The University of Minnesota has joined the Alliance for the Arts and Research Universities, A2RU, which is the primary organization that connects the arts to other disciplines on campus. So I'm hopeful that we'll be seeing a lot more collaborative work between the arts, the sciences, the social sciences, the humanities, everything that a university does. On September 11th, some of our composition students will be at the Mall of America for a really interesting project. There's a PBS television series called Songs About Buildings and Moods that looks at architectural spaces and imagines them as sound. And so they're looking at the Mall of America, and our students have written music for that PBS series, which is really exciting. I think many of you know Renee Fleming will be in town to talk about music in the mind, music and mindfulness, thanks to the Schubert Club. Our students have been invited to attend at greatly discounted and in many cases free opportunities. So thank you for those of you that make that kind of thing possible. Some of you might know that the University of Minnesota is hosting the 40th anniversary of Farm Aid this year. This is the organization that uses large musical events to draw attention to the plight of family farmers and the challenges of agribusiness. That does mean, yes, Willie Nelson will be on campus, but we're going to get to work with Reezy Palmer, who's an extraordinary African-American country musician that hosts an organization, a radio series called Color Me Country, about the role of Black, Indigenous, and Latinx artists in that musical world that we tend to think of as fairly white. Some of you may know that last year our students were invited to perform side by side with the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra in a performance of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony at Ted Mann. This year, our choirs will be performing side by side with the SPCO, both at the Ordway and at Ted Mann. That's, I don't know if I have the dates in front of me here, September 25th through 28th. That's a concert you do not want to miss. It'll be with the extraordinary South African cellist Abel Selassie. Shahad Ismaili will be on campus in October, thanks to the Walker Arts Center. Shahzad, if you don't know him, is an extraordinary improvising musician, producer. He's sometimes called a musician's favorite musician. So if you get a chance to go either to the Walker or here, you'll be able to hear him. Chad Smith, the drummer for the Red Hot Chili Peppers, will be here for homecoming. The Smith Foundation is making a very generous gift to our School of Music to support undergraduate students. We're very excited about that. And there is endlessly more: choir concerts, orchestra concerts, wind band concerts. I will preview the spring. Emily Trinan is bringing in the incredible group Eighth Blackbird to perform Vital Signs, a kind of concerto for that small group and wind ensemble. And we'll be performing it both here on campus and at the Music Educators Conference downtown. So a huge amount going on. I think most of you know this is a challenging time, both for the arts and higher education, and I can always trust Clayton to find our donation link quickly to drop in the chat. If you're able to make any gift, large or small, to help our students, we really appreciate everything that you do for us. So thank you so much. We will do this again soon, I hope. And I'm sure we can find chances to interact. Thanks so much, everyone.